Okay, why don't we get going here? We are, what time? 7:01, calling the meeting to order. And let's go around the room and maybe we can do a modified roll call and introduce ourselves and, I don't know, say a sentence about ourselves or something here. I'm Todd, I'm the chair of the committee. I have been on the committee now for, I guess, a couple of years, 2.5 years, something like that. And very happy to have some more faces here so we can actually have a quorum and get some things done. So that's good. So welcome everybody. Who's next? Neil, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Neil Shaw, I'm the trustee rep for PROSTAC. I got assigned to this committee a couple of years ago after the election. And since we have an election that you may have heard about in a week or so, after that election, we may scramble who's on the board or who's assigned to which committee, but I've had an awesome time for the last 2 years. So I'm going to try to keep it.
We'd appreciate that. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was thumbs upping for Neil to keep the committee.
Okay. I thought you just were dying to go next.
I am Sarah. I've been on the committee. I think June will be 2 years. And I've lived in Rock Creek for 7. And I'm happy to see new members and more females on the committee. It's exciting.
And go ahead, Corbett.
I was giving a thumbs up to Sarah's comment, but I'll go ahead. So Corbett Hunninger, I've been on the committee for, I guess this is my 6th year now. I'm the vice chair, and I do whatever Todd needs whenever he's not around. I try to help out.
Most appreciated, Corbett. Dan, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dan Walkus. I've been a member since 2018, just over 2 years now. I am the designated note taker, but if anyone wants to arm wrestle me for it, yeah, I actually will concede. You don't even have to arm wrestle me.
You are so good at it, Dan. I don't know if we can let anyone take it away. Thanks for all your hard work on that, by the way, Dan.
Hi, I'm Jen Cowish, and I just moved here this summer to town, and we love it. And I'm just really excited to be participating and learning about what we do on this committee. So.
Welcome, Jennifer. Go for it, Marcia.
Hi, I'm Marcia. I'm new. Glad to be here. Been Colorado about 15 years or so, but Rock Creek for the past year. And sat and watched for some time and now ready to participate and help out.
Welcome aboard. Who's next? Haley?
Hi, I'm Haley Goodstein, and I'm relatively new both to Colorado and to Superior, but I very much enjoyed the tour today of the soon to be community center, and looking forward to working on that and other projects for PROSTAC.
Welcome aboard. Susan, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm Susan Stanish. I've been on PROSTAC for, I think, about 3 years, lose track. Really enjoy it. I've lived in Rock Creek for more than 20 years, so like a long time, and really enjoy being on PROSTAC and learning about the community and contributing.
And Hollis.
Hi, I'm Hollis, also brand new. I've been in Rock Creek for about 2 years, and then just to make things extra fun, my given name is Hollis, but I actually go by Holly. So if I ever sign emails or you see me referring to myself as Holly, I am in fact the same. That is me, the same person. My parents just made a lot of administrative headache for me and giving me both names.
Got it. Well,
yeah.
Welcome aboard.
It's great.
And Leslie, where are you at?
Here I am. Hi, everybody. Welcome to all the new members. Leslie Clark, I'm the PROST director, and I serve as the staff liaison to this committee. So help get the agendas together and help answer any questions you may have. So nice to meet everybody.
Yes, indeed. Welcome aboard, everybody. And we have 9 people. Thank you, Neil, for helping that happen. Super, super helpful to have that. So
I'm just excited. I was excited. We had a lot of applicants, so this was really great for everybody. There's a lot of people in town that are excited to help out. So this is huge.
It is a good thing. Do we have any public comment, Leslie? Is anyone on?
We have one attendee. I did post a note in the chat to have them raise their hand if they would like to talk. I don't see a raised hand anywhere. So, oh, there we go. I'm gonna go ahead and allow Patrick to talk.
Hey everyone, Patrick Wallace. Just in today to figure out what this is all about. Lived in Rock Creek pretty much since 1997. Took a few years to move out of the area into East Boulder and then move back about 8 years ago. So really excited to see the community evolve and develop and grow. And thank you everyone for the work you're doing here on this committee, and looking for ways that I can help out. So didn't get my name submitted to be part of this, but if there's anything that I can do to contribute, let me know.
Thanks for jumping on, Patrick. We will keep you in mind and try to pile as much work on you as possible.
I don't know if I can compete with Dan on the arm wrestling, but you know, I'll take him up maybe on a trail run out on one of our great trails any day. So
Yeah, like I said, you don't even have to take it on. You can just ask to take notes and you get it.
There you go. Thank you.
Did you have anything in particular you wanted to comment on, Patrick, or just introducing yourself?
Yeah, just introducing myself.
Okay,
I think I'm the only other one on the call, so.
Okie doke. Well, we went through introductions and welcome to new members, so I think we're good to go. Before we move on, any thoughts, comments, questions from any of the new folks? And we can either talk about things if they're short now, or I can take them offline as well.
I have a random question. I'm getting these like email spam filter messages, like they say PROSTAC and it's like supposed to be an email digest of anything that's gone to spam on the PROSTAC account. Is that just part of the bonuses now, or anyone know why those are happening?
Us too.
Yeah, Leslie, do you want to comment on that? You probably know. I've just accepted that they happen. I don't really know what they are either.
Is it like a spam report that you're getting?
Yes, it is.
Okay. You can just look at it, and if it's for some reason filtering mail that you want to get, you can release it from that report. It allows you to preview and release those emails that might be filtered out through our firewall. So I had no idea you guys were getting those, but yes, I get them almost every day.
Yeah, I just set up a rule to put those in the trash can.
Okay, we have also Mike online with us here. And Mike is going to walk us through master plan updates and whatever else he's going to do. I'm not entirely sure. Do you want to introduce yourself, Mike?
Hey, Todd, yep. Before we do that, should we do agenda approval?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I skipped that. Thank you, Dan, for jumping in there. So we are going to, as I mentioned, Mike's going to give us an update on the master plan. And then there's a couple other things related to that with regard to support for them outside the regular meetings and having a couple of people that want to do that, and then any other to-dos that come up from that. We have a trail ranking that needs to get finalized. I think it's really pretty finalized at this point. I don't think it makes any sense at this point to try to bring in the new members and re-evaluating that. I think it's just, we need to leave it as it is probably for now. And 1500 Colton, we had a tour earlier. We can go through that and then talk about some future, just go forward planning and items there. Neil is going to give us an update on some PROSTAC, OSAC go forward things. There's a couple of things in look ahead I'd like to get an update if we can, Leslie, in pickleball for everybody. And then there's the Q4 to-dos that really are the work plan for next year, and then a couple of other items that we'll go through in the look ahead, but nothing big there. And then adjourn. Any other items to be added for today?
I was going to suggest just a quick update about the status of the Crusher Fine Trail, and like if we're going to do anything about that. I had someone from the OSAC committee ask me about it, so I wanted to just bring it up in the meeting, so we could just quickly cover that.
Yep, will do.
Also, and if we could get a quick update on the proposal that we were putting in for, I can't remember the name of it. We talked about last time where it was the Coyote Ridge for the trail maintenance and the other thing.
Is it grant?
Yeah, the grant, that was it. Thank you. I'm trying to remember.
Okay, I got that on the updates. Any other items? Okie doke. Well, let's jump in here if we can. And Mike, do you want to take the floor? And
Sure.
I don't know if you want to share your screen or what your plan is, but it's all yours.
Yep, I will share my screen. So thank you so much. My name is Mike Svets. I'm a principal with PROST Consulting, and we are the firm that is moving forward with developing an update to your Parks, Recreation, Open Space Trails Master Plan. We are teamed with Logan Simpson. They are primarily focused on, as some of you may know, focused on park inventory assessment, assisting a little bit with what we would call a level of service, and I'm going to do a couple of concept plans, and some of the information that we'll share with you tonight will kind of help us determine what those potential concept plans are. So tonight, yes, I will share my screen. I do have a presentation to walk through with you all. And so hopefully everybody can see that. Really, this is the first, what I would kind of call first real update. The information that I've shared with you all previously was really just the process that we were going to go through in terms of developing your PROST master plan. So tonight, we kind of wanted to walk through what we would call some influencing factors. And a lot of this is data that is driven by the Environmental Systems Research Institute. Really, the influencing factors that we'll touch on tonight are demographic information, as well as what we refer to as market potential for different recreation activities. It's a good data point to utilize to help kind of define community needs. We will also kind of touch on the public input that we've done so far, including a virtual community meeting, as well as the project website participation. The majority of this presentation, though, will be sharing with you the results of a community needs survey that was posted on your shapesuperior.com website for about probably close to about 2 months. And we ended up with 401 completed surveys, which is fantastic. And just kind of in comparison to some of the other surveys that the town has done, it ranks pretty high up there in terms of responsiveness. So, and then we'll kind of summarize this with regards to taking all of this information and creating what we would call a set of prioritized community needs. I think one big thing I want to make sure that everybody recognizes is that though we're going to show prioritized needs, we need to recognize that this, though a very foundational data point for you in terms of developing your master plan, it is not the only data point that will help determine your master plan. So it's very important. Parks and Recreation, Open Space Trails is meant to be utilized, whether it be actively or passively by your community. And it's important to try and develop a system, enhance a system that is in line with what your community wants. But again, it also has to be grounded in reality in terms of what it is that you can do, land availability, and such things, important things such as the ability to fund your system. So the other component that we'll touch on then is kind of the next steps, just to kind of tie back to understanding how this information will be utilized and interfaced with the other data points that we're still kind of working through. So influencing factors, you all recognize that this is Superior in terms of its outline. I think it's important to recognize that Superior is 4 square miles. So it is not an overly expansive community in terms of land availability. And that is an important data point to kind of consider, because simply that means that there's likely not an overabundance of land available to develop new parks. So the first data point is population. You recognize that you're probably somewhere around 13,500 folks, and you're going to grow to about 17,600 folks. That doesn't seem like a lot of folks, but when you consider kind of the year-over-year population gain, it's about double what the U.S. Average growth rate is. U.S. average growth rate is somewhere between 0.8 and 1% annually, and you all are somewhere between 1.5 and 2% annually. It means that you're going to grow by about 4,000 folks. But I think one of the very important data points in terms of your population is your population density. And so I did just some really quick homework in terms of how your population density compares to some other surrounding communities, both small, medium, and of course Denver being large. And you can see that you're kind of in the middle there in terms of overall population density. So the amount of people that you have for every square mile. If you were to grow as projected by the Environmental Systems Research Institute, based on the current estimate, if you were to grow to about 17,644 folks, your population density is going to be kind of in the neighborhood of about 4,411 folks per square mile. So that takes you above kind of where Boulder is at right now, and we're a little bit shy of where Denver is right now. So though you're kind of considered to be a town, you definitely have a very strong density, and you will continue to get more dense as the years go by. So next slide, I think this is also an important distinction, is to kind of understand where your population is in terms of age segmentation. So again, as defined by the Environmental Systems Research Institute, you actually have a pretty balanced and actually much younger population than the comparing it to the national. 55 and older, it makes up about 29% of the overall population. And you guys are at best half of that. So you certainly have a younger population, a very family-oriented population, and you're going to continue to be that. Though you will age a little bit, you're certainly not what we would kind of define as a community that's driven by active seniors or what we call kind of super seniors. So I think it's important to recognize that your kind of before school and school age population is currently at about 28%. That will decrease to 23%. But again, you still have projecting 15 years from now to be a pretty balanced and younger population. This is important to recognize because given the fact that you are balanced and given the fact that you are younger, it's important to recognize that you're going to have to utilize resources from a Parks and Recreation, open space trails perspective to kind of meet a lot of different needs. People cycle through no pun intended, people cycle through recreation activities. We have a tendency as kids to kind of lean towards sports and activities that people are, I don't want to say subject to, but become aware of as a younger kid through school and through all of those touch points. And you have a tendency to change your recreational habits as you get older. So your recreational habits with young families are different than your recreational habits when you have teens, and certainly different than when you're empty nesters, and so on and so forth. Another key driver that we like to look at is ethnicity or race. And this is often overlooked, but it's important to recognize that culture often influences parks and recreation experiences. So your community is primarily white alone and Asian. It's not to say that you don't have other diversity in your community, but when you look at your white alone population and your Asian population, that makes up about 92-93% of your overall community. We like to break out Hispanic population, Hispanic Latino origin, because it is not a standalone ethnic race grouping as defined by the census. It is a subset of any of the other main categories. So we break it out to kind of get an understanding. You do have some Hispanic population, but it is certainly not off the charts by any means, and it's not growing by leaps and bounds over the next 15 years. So next slide is income levels. And you all know that you are more affluent than Colorado as a whole, and certainly more affluent than the US as a whole. Some of this is very much driven simply by cost of living. This is not necessarily to equate the fact that though you have higher income levels, that means everybody in your community has more discretionary income to spend on parks and recreation. Though given those numbers, you definitely likely have a community that has more disposable income. And so this really has an opportunity to look at some aspects of the Parks, Recreation, Open Space Trail system as opportunities to generate revenue to offset expenditures. This is a very philosophical discussion that we're currently working through with regards to staff. But again, this doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to charge everything you're going to charge, and you're going to try to recover all of your costs on every elements. But there may be opportunities, given the fact that you do have a greater percentage of disposable income, to allow in particular on the recreation side of the equation, an opportunity to recover costs and maybe do business a little bit differently. So the next set of information is the market potential index that I indicated to you all was a part of these influencing factors. So again, this is defined by the Environmental Systems Research Institute. It's derived information from integration from a bunch of different community consumer surveys. Esri, I should probably mention, is the global leader in market data. And though we draw this information specifically for parks and recreation, you can pull so many different reports related to Superior and any geographical boundary you would like within the US, and define a lot of different, what we would kind of call consumer habits. You can even define whether or not your community prefers to do paying its bills online, or if they still prefer to do it by phone or by mail. You can determine what restaurants your community has a tendency to visit more often than others. So it is not necessarily just a database that is utilized for purposes of parks and recreation and open space trails master plans, but it is a database that the private sector utilizes in a way to determine in some cases, market potential for private sector businesses. So in this case, the market potential index measures the probable demand for any recreation activity in Superior, and it kind of shows the likelihood that a resident will participate in certain recreation activities when compared to the rest of the country. So we established kind of an, Esri establishes an arbitrary number of 100 to measure national average. And so I'm going to show you a series of charts that kind of indicate for each of these recreation activities, whether you're above the national average or whether you're below the national average in terms of average participation and demand. So the first set is general sports market potential. And you can see that for all of the different sports, including such things as recreation activities such as ping pong, you are well above the bar. Your lowest in terms of being above the bar is football, and that is 11% greater than the national average. So as expected, as we went into this plan, you're a very active community with regards to general sports. When we look at fitness, again, the same kind of things come up. You can see that, you know, from aerobics to jogging to Pilates, all the way across the board. Ironically, your walking for exercise is the lowest with regards to being above the national average. And the only reason I point that out is because the number one activity across the entire country is walking for exercise. So you have people that do walk more often, and you certainly have a greater percentage of folks walking for exercise in your community than doing anything else. But when compared to the national average, when you compare it to all of these other activities related to general fitness, it is the lowest. Again, not to understate it, just to recognize that it is the lowest with regards to being on this chart. And then outdoor activity, this is where we start getting into bicycling and bird watching and hiking and horseback riding and target shooting. So you can see some things on this list that are maybe up to 18% lower than the national average, to 7%, to even just target shooting being 2%. But then you look at such things as backpacking and biking, both mountain biking and road biking, as well as such things as hiking, you're well above the national average. So, you know, pretty much the takeaway here is the fact that you're a very active community, whether it be sports, whether it be fitness, or whether it be outdoor recreational activities. This is not necessarily surprising, but again, it is a data point that we use to start to help to interface with other data points when we start talking about community needs. So the next set of information is really around, as I mentioned, public input, and we'll get into the survey. But just as a reminder, we're doing our very best in COVID times to create a collaborative planning process. We have had some focus groups with members of PROSTAC. We also did a virtual community meeting back in August, which I'll touch on. We do have the project website through shapesuperior.com, where this presentation will reside, but also where we're trying to gather community input in terms of general questions, concerns, comments, suggestions, and is also where we pointed folks to with regards to taking the survey. And then, of course, outreach, and this can come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes. One of the things that we always look at from the number of committees that you have is you're kind of a liaison between the community and town council. And so having an opportunity for you all to continue to advocate and share information, not just that you specifically have with regards to parks, recreation, open space, as well as trails, but what the community has to say and how that works its way into the plan as well. So the virtual community meeting, it was held on August 3rd, and it was very well attended. We created awareness through direct email invites, through customer database, town press release, social media, the town's website, and again, social media. Sorry, I left that on there twice. But we ended up with about 82 participants on this virtual community meeting, which is actually tremendous for a community of your size. We have fortunately been able to do a lot of these across the country. And when you compare your population to the number of folks that participated with other agencies that have populations, 10, 20 times your size, this is a fantastic participation rate. Some of the takeaways that we heard, and we did some live polling associated with this. It was just meant to kind of as a way to help people interface with the project initially. But folks have really strong advocacy and appreciation for the system. There is a desire for indoor recreation. You notice that many of the fitness elements shown on the market potential index are really driven by indoor recreation centers and fitness locations. And so that kind of aligns with the community's general need for indoor recreation. Investing and taking care of what you already have. You will often hear me say park system, but when I say park system, that's a general term to kind of capture parks, recreation, and open space and trails. Open space preservation is desired. As you all would expect, trails is exceptionally high on the list. And though trails is exceptionally high on the list for you all, it is typically the #1 requested amenity or asset across the country. What some of the few locations in this country that have asked for things others than trails is simply locations that already have a really strong trail system and are lacking in other things such as indoor recreation or swimming pools. And of course, anything that the community recognizes that anything you build, anything you manage, anything you maintain certainly has to come with the dollars and cents necessary to do so. So this is just kind of a snapshot of the project website, kind of the homepage. And we have been able to, you can see on the homepage there, a little button that allows people the opportunity to share some ideas. And so these are some of the ideas that we have heard through the website participation. Wanting to have own rec center and library center, to things like just having water fountains along trails and open space, connecting your trail system, markers on your trails. I think you can kind of see the theme here. Having some, there was a very specific comment related to the last master plan that had proposed a trail and trailhead at the top of McCaslin near the reservoir. This individual kind of thought it would be a good idea to actually remove that recommendation just simply because of all of the potential conflicts that location now would create, whether it be vehicles and or other things. Again, other trail connections from 88th Street to the new downtown that's currently in the process of hoping to be developed. Trails from Yarrow to the elementary school, El Dorado. And then you kind of get into some other, again, but a lot of this is outdoor activity, an amphitheater for special events, miniature golf, things related to, Pitkin, fishing piers, restocking them, and then of course splash pads came up. I think it's important to note that we might get different responses as we head into cooler months, but and again, the website will be available for folks to continue to do that. as recreation habits have a tendency to change as we get into winter. So as I said, the bulk of this presentation is really going to be about the online survey. And we did it, as I mentioned, via shapesuperior.com. The questions were certainly developed in partnership with the town. And the framework for the other thing that I think was really important is, the questions and the choices that were provided were certainly helped and influenced by the number of comments that we had through all of the different committee meetings, as well as focus groups. And we even did a focus group with the Youth Leadership Commission as well. And almost every one of those members had to respond to those questions. Kevin Colon from the town was great at ensuring that the kids were accountable and responsible to responding. But this survey was online from August 17th through October 11th. We wanted to leave it on a little bit longer than typical because we knew that as we were putting this survey online, school in some way, shape, or form was starting to resume. There was a major transition going on in many households in Superior at that time. So we wanted folks to give people enough time to be able to respond, even to the point that when we looked at it at the end of September, we were around 334 surveys. So the last 2 weeks of a push generated an additional 65 to 70 surveys being completed. So the first set of questions and responses that I want to walk through with you is just advocacy for your system. It was certainly something that came up in the virtual
Mike, I think we lost your video or your audio.
How about now? Better?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So the first, let me get back to this here real quick. So the first set of questions we asked was, folks, what were the top 5 benefits that their households received from the Superior system? And you can see I just kind of did green, yellow, red in terms of the most. And so the top 4 were really around physical health and fitness, desirable place to live, preserving open space and protecting the environment, and reducing mental health and stress. And then the 5th one, though it was less than 50% responded to, was increasing people's property values. And then you kind of got into some other things. Tourism and economic business development is certainly not something that folks look to use Parks and Recreation your system for as a way to kind of create economic development and or bring tourism. You're not set up, your system is not necessarily set up to draw and be a regional draw. It is really about serving your community and your residents. So the next slide was just rating the overall value that the households receive from the system. And we asked folks to kind of, tell us what their level of satisfaction was. So the big takeaway here is more than half of the folks felt that they were very satisfied with the value that they received from the system. And another 37% indicated that they were somewhat satisfied. So when you combine those numbers, you're looking at 91% of your community kind of indicating some level of satisfaction. And I think it's even more telling that when we look at not satisfied at all, or even just being disappointed generally, those numbers are 2%. And so I think a 7% of neutral kind of means, yeah, it does a good job, but there are other elements or things that I'd like to see. So overall, you all are doing a great job in terms of helping to meet people's needs. So another question that we asked was very specific to COVID, the coronavirus. And it was simply, how has your household's perception of the value of your system changed as a result of COVID? And so, again, a pretty telling tale here that 72% of your community has started to value your system more as a result of COVID than they did pre-pandemic. And that's really, really telling. Some 24%, 1 out of every 4 indicated no change. But again, I think you look at those that value your system less because of COVID, really, really small numbers, only 4%. So, and we're seeing this as something that across the country that, and it might have something to do with a couple of factors. One, that maybe things that people, I don't want to say took for granted, but just kind of accepted as an opportunity for them, maybe didn't exist. And so folks felt like something was taken away from them, which in turn kind of increases that intrinsic value. And the others is simply the fact that, and we heard this a lot from the kids, that people are actually using your system more. It allows for social distancing. It allows for people to get out and exercise, whereas some places that they may have exercised previously, like say a Lifetime Fitness in a neighboring community, wasn't available to them to do consistently. So people had to kind of switch up their routine. So I think this is really telling, and the fact that people very much value your system, number one, but that has increased over the last 7 months because of COVID, is really strong advocacy for your PROST system. So a next set of questions is really around condition and quality. And this is really just asking people how they rated the overall condition of your outdoor spaces. So parks, trails, swimming pools, and so on and so forth. Though this is not a statistically valid survey, I think it's important to recognize that 80% of your community rates you as either excellent or very good. And then another 17% rated you as good. So if we use the ABCDF scale to align with excellent through poor, you're kind of pretty much getting all A's and B's and a few C's mixed in there as well. Not a lot of folks indicated, nobody indicated poor. Only 1% indicated as fair, and only, again, 1% indicated that they had not used the system at all. So if this were a statistically valid survey, we would want the excellent rating to be somewhere around 29 or 30%. And being a recovering Parks and Recreation director, I can honestly tell you, I think that is setting the bar pretty low. I think we all, or at least a lot of us, always strive to get A's in school. And I think you should have a system that is rated as A over B's or C's. So though your A's and B's combined are greater than your B's and C's, I still think you have some room to improve with regards to the excellent rating. In terms of how would you rate recreation programs, and I think, this number is probably, I need to break it down a little bit further and take that 30% out, because 30% of survey respondents had not used recreation programs and services. But again, excellent is at 8% and very good is at 34%. The pie chart would look very differently if I just took the 30% out. completely, the 8%, the 34%, 23% would grow, because those are the folks that actually have an ability to rate your programs. So again, similarly to condition, a typical statistically valid survey result that we derive from other surveys across the country that we do, excellent rating is around 34%. So what I in turn will do with regards to this is take the 30% out and see how those numbers change. But the fact that you have 70% of your community who is responding to this survey utilizing your programs and services is a really strong number. One of the things I think is important to draw a correlation to is that many programs and services are, in terms of overall quality, is tied to the location and or spaces in which they're being held. And so given the fact that you have a little lower number than we would like in terms of condition of facilities and parks and trails and open space, that is likely a contributing factor to how people are rating the quality of programs and services. I've always said that anytime you go to do anything, whether it be a baby shower or whether it be a sports program, the first thing you do is I kind of identify where you want to do it at. And so location, condition of space has a direct result or a direct influence on how well people perceive the quality of programs and services to be.
Hey, Mike, can I ask you a quick question on this?
Sure,
And
absolutely.
I'm trying to compare it to what you said on the average for Superior for how we, use our recreation time, either inside or outside. And is there any inferences that we could make on that 30% have not used the services? Is there any inferences that, maybe some of what we do or up to 30% of what we do doesn't appeal to the folks based on what you saw as is what they spend their recreation time doing? And is there, something that maybe we could learn from that to say, can we reevaluate what we offer and maybe help shrink that down if we offer different things?
You're getting into the next set of questions and answers. So that's helpful. But the big takeaway here is typically if it were a statistically valid survey, the number we would be looking for in terms of community participation in programs and services is closer to 34%. So though this is not a statistically valid survey, of all the people that did take this survey, 70% of folks participated in your programs and services. I'm thinking that given the size of your population, given the fact that you do have a fairly strong recreation programs and services, whether it be through partnerships or whether it be through town directly, you have strong participation. And so in terms of how do you get the other 30% on board, which is I think kind of what you're inferring, that's going to be that next set of questions. Okay. So before we dive into that, I just kind of wanted to show the question that we asked related to marketing and awareness, because one of the things that is sometimes a barrier to people participating in recreation programs and services, usually the number one thing is I'm not aware. And some of the creating awareness is, how do you go about creating awareness? Is it just kind of a scattershot approach and you just put out as much information as you possibly can across a lot of different mediums? Or, is it literally more target marketing? So this next question is really about, what are the ways in which people prefer to learn about your system? And so you kind of it's really interesting because you really have a clear-cut top two, and then a third one with regards to social media that's very Facebook driven. So though you can certainly put things out on brochures and flyers, or you can try to use Instagram and Twitter, a lot of people aren't necessarily looking to get your information about your system through those ways. And so if resources are always confined or restrained, especially when it comes to marketing, this helps to define exactly how you want to reach people. And so I think it's a really, really important thing to try to overcome, because usually one of the biggest reason why people don't actively participate in programs and services that you do is simply because they're not aware. And sometimes we don't put enough resources in the way that people want to learn about your system or your programs and services, and we kind of take that scattershot approach. So I think, Shape Superior is relatively new to your community. And I think as people become more aware of it, it will help to supplement the kind of the typical static information that is on the town website. Whereas Shape Superior is meant to be more of an interactive community dialogue. And I think Kevin Cologne would probably indicate that these numbers are not where he would want them to be for Shape Superior, but they're probably much higher than they were, say, a year or two ago. So again, just a way to kind of help you focus your resources in terms of creating awareness and continued awareness about what it is that you all do. So to your point, Corbett, recreation program and activity needs. So I know this is a lot of information, but we ask people a lot of choices. So this is simply a matter of what do people have a need for? What do they kind of find important for you to offer? Now, I think it's important to recognize that the things that are typically a little bit higher in the green areas are simply things that are available to a lot more people, or potentially available to a lot more people across age segmentation, and in some cases don't necessarily require a ton of skill, so to speak. So community special events is number one in your community, and fitness and wellness programs is number two. Open swim, even though your swim season right now is limited to your outdoor pools, came in at number three. The things that we see at the lower end of the spectrum, you can see are very, very skill specific, special interest specific, and in many cases, very age specific. You don't have a lot of us 45 to 54-year-olds out there playing basketball, playing volleyball, doing gymnastics, even playing softball all that much anymore. We have a tendency to move to more self-directed activity, which is kind of what you're seeing in some of the green shaded bars, as well as the yellow shaded bars. Any questions on this? So this is what people have a need for, and what they kind of deem important to them, that they just want, people in their households to participate in. So when we look at basically this next slide is unmet need. So this is, what do you want Superior to provide that you're currently not doing, or to provide more of, whether it be directly through the town or whether it be in partnerships. So you can see many of the things that were people found to have a need for, they also feel like they want you to do and provide more of. And so a lot of there's a lot of synergy between what people have a need for and also what they want you to do more of. Any surprises on these lists?
And Mike, I got a question on this.
Sure.
How does this list compare to the demographic, what you would expect, right? You said that Superior has a little bit lower age demographic than some other areas. From your perspective, from what you've seen, how does our age demographic align with these things? And does that match up typically what you see for that age demographic?
Yeah, it does. And a couple of things I can kind of point out here. You know, I think one of the things that you kind of see on this list is that a lot of the sport related activities are at the lower end of the spectrum. But, you know, kids can't participate, number one, in all the sports. And number two, how kids participate in sports has changed dramatically over the last 10 years, where they focus on one or two as opposed to playing a different sport every season. But yes, I think when you think about your demographics and you think about the family oriented part of your community, which is why special events is a huge need as well as an unmet need. Fitness and wellness is a direct tie to even that market potential index and your demographics, because you have a younger community that is more apt to participate in what we would call those traditional fitness and wellness programs. Same thing with walking, jogging, running clubs. If you were an older community, we might see people wanting to have walking clubs, but we certainly wouldn't want to see you wouldn't see jogging and running clubs as well. Open swim being up there at the top, as well as after school programs. Again, a very family oriented community. A lot of times we don't see open swim and after school programs being in your top 5. Usually those are kind of in the middle or middle low. So what we're seeing here is pretty good alignment with your demographic information, as well as some of that market potential index that we typically would see. And I think another thing to kind of point out is that I mentioned as we went through the demographic information that you have, you know, about half the percentage of folks that are 55 and older is about half of what we see nationally. And your senior programs and services is in the red, kind of there between tennis and pickleball. Pickleball being a little bit lower. We have seen that be in the medium range. And not to say that pickleball is strictly a 55 and older activity, but it leans that way. And so you start to see senior programs and pickleball lessons kind of be in that 15% range. That kind of gives you an indication that you're a younger community. If you were an older community, typically we see senior programs and services not be anything other than a yellow. And in many cases, we see it being a green bar as well. Okay. So same exercise for parks, facilities, amenities. What do people have a need for? I don't think any of this is going to surprise you all. But trails is right at the top, and then followed by open space conservation parks, and then generally neighborhood parks and large community parks, and then an aquatics facility that is geared towards a recreation pool. The competition pool, lap pool kind of falls in the middle there. And then you start to get into what I would call more site-specific amenities that you find in parks. So playgrounds is pretty much a staple of parks and recreation systems across the country. Pavilions, picnic sites is a staple. Dog parks has certainly become a staple over the last 15 to 20 years. But recreation and community center is pretty high on your list in terms of need. 45% of your community has a need for that. So let me try to put this in perspective. We, as a firm, as a company, do all kinds of park and recreation studies. And one of the things that we do a lot of is we do feasibility studies for communities that look to build or want to build recreation community centers. Typically, when you start thinking about the percentage of folks in your community that will consistently use a recreation and community center, that percentage is usually between 20 and 25%. That means you've done a really good job of capturing the market, and then you build a facility and offer amenities to those people that they want. So it allows you an opportunity to kind of right size your facility. You have a community here that has that folks have a need for a recreation community center at 45%. And I want to make a very clear distinction. The community center that you all toured today is very much a community center. It's very much about passive activity, meeting space, group gathering space, some smaller activities, group activities. A recreation center, on the other hand, I think many of you know this, is more about gymnasium space, fitness center space, group exercise studio space, and in some cases, even swimming pool space, indoor walking track. So there is a clear distinction between recreation and community center. And the fact that you have a community center coming online here in the spring, and folks are still kind of indicating that you have a need for it at 45%, is kind of telling, especially when you start comparing it to the activities, the program side of the equation, and fitness and wellness programs being number 2, both in terms of have a need for as well as have an unmet need for. So when we start to look at what you want more of, so you can see that the top 2 are natural surface trails and open space conservation areas. The community center is at 35%. So it's still kind of above that threshold of 20 to 25%. Again, this kind of gives me a really good indication, though, when you compare the number of green bars that people have a need for and the number of yellow bars that people have a need for to what people want more of, you can see that there is a lot fewer green bars and a lot fewer yellow bars on this chart, which means that all those things in red, people either have that need really met strongly, or they don't want you to do it at all if you're not doing it. That's kind of a big takeaway from this, and I'll summarize it kind of when we get into the actual prioritization of needs. But this is really telling, because it's one thing to find something needed and important when we're doing a master plan, but it's also critically important to find out what people want you to do more of. And that kind of starts to set that direction. So you have a lot more red bars, and I did the cutoff at basically anything under 25% unmet need, it kind of has that red bar. That means 1 out of every 4 people need competition pools, lap pools, more paved trails, and so on and so forth. Okay. All right. So,
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
One of the things you showed on there, which I think maybe conflicts with something we saw earlier, like splash pad. I thought I saw a splash pad was something that they highly valued. It's something that they would be interested in, but then we see it over here as a red. And
yeah, so that was
opposite.
Yeah, that was just one person's comment that came through on the actual website. So it wasn't something that we saw a ton of people requesting splash pads. I just thought it was interesting that comment came through in the middle of the summer. I think that you wouldn't get that comment that comes through in December. So again, I that's why we're kind of using all of this information together to really kind of understand where the system needs to go.
One other question on this slide, Mike, before you move on. Sorry.
Dan, no problem.
Did this one cover library, or did that have library as one of the options? I'm not seeing it.
It did not.
Yeah. Hey, Mike. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Just a quick question on the survey. Do we know the age of the respondents of the survey?
Yes, it was very consistent, and I did not pull. I looked at that information, but I didn't pull the demographics. you know, and show that, but it's consistent with what we saw with regards to your age segmentation. It was not skewed to any one specific age group. It was very family oriented, and so, but yes, it's very consistent with your population.
Okay, cool.
Sure. Okay, so this is where the rubber starts to meet the road. So it's one thing to say you have a need for something. It's something else to say you have an unmet need for something. But we ask people the funding question. So what are people most supportive of funding to improve the existing system? So you can see that there's kind of 4 green bars, and I made that cutoff at about 43%. It's not 50%, but I think that 43% is a pretty good indicator, because if you were to kind of thinking about whether or not you wanted to build something like this, you're close to getting half of the people on board. So trails, improving the existing trail system, 2/3 of folks were okay with you spending money on it. Another 3 out of every 5 folks indicated repair and increased maintenance of just general maintenance of your system. Adding loop trails to existing parks where they don't exist, more than 50% of folks. And then the swimming pool kind of came in at 43%. So then, to your point, you know, Corbett, about splash pads, that came in at about 30% of folks. So 3 out of every 10 folks were okay with you spending money on that. One of the big takeaways, and I put it in green at the very bottom here, is only 2% of folks that took the survey were not supportive at all of spending any money to improve the existing system. That's a really telling takeaway, especially when you compare it to the advocacy questions and the results that we got out of those. You have really strong advocacy to improve your system in ways that, as long as people want you to do so. So even things that are at 20, 21%, those are still some pretty strong numbers, but you definitely have kind of a clear-cut top 3 or 4 in terms of how people want you to spend money to improve the existing system. All right. So the next question was really about what are people supportive of you spending money to expand? So build something that's new. So this is the big connection that I'm going to take all the way back to what I said about population density, and why sometimes we can't align all recommendations based on community need. So you have 4 square miles to work in. You currently have about 3,700 or 3,300 folks per square mile. And you're going to grow to somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,400 folks per square mile. There's probably not a lot of land that you can purchase to do open space. However, if there is, it's the number one thing that people want you to spend money on to expand the system. And there's potentially a lot of social dynamics that go into why people want you to preserve land as opposed to, quote unquote, it being developed. But it's your number one takeaway. Developing new trails that connect to other amenities. And then number 3 was developing an indoor recreation / community center. If that's something that we kind of tease out as a recommendation, one of the things that a huge recommendation, and I'm not jonesing for more work, but you would certainly want to do a feasibility study before you jumped into a facility that's likely going to cost you 8 figures to build, so north of $10 million. unless you're retrofitting an existing building that already exists, like you're doing with the with 1500 Colton. And just as an aside, every 50,000 square foot of indoor recreation center space that has gymnasiums, fitness space, maybe an indoor pool, every 50,000 square foot of space you build typically costs you $1 to $1.5 million to operate every year. So though people are definitely supportive of spending money to build a new facility, we certainly need to understand the costs associated with doing so, because it's a lot easier for a community of your size potentially to come up with the dollars to build it than it is to operate it year over year. Again, I'm not saying not to do it. What I'm saying is you would want to go into something like that eyes wide open and understand your total cost of ownership. So then you can kind of see it's interesting that new off-leash dog parks is down at the bottom. And then, of course, some sort of remote control recreation area for drones, model airplanes is at the bottom. But again, another big takeaway and advocacy for your system is that only 4% of folks said they're not supportive of all, to spend money to expand the system. So again, I think that there's not necessarily, any surprises, but I definitely think this is a lot of affirmation from the work that you all have done and previous PROSTAC members have done in terms of surveying the community.
Is there
So,
any?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Is there any conclusion you draw from the fact that the most people are not supportive of spending more about community events, but they ranked it really highly? That was like the highest thing in terms of they'd like to provide more of.
They don't necessarily want you to develop any more spaces for community events. They just want you to use the spaces that you have right now to do more community events.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the takeaway.
Okay.
Now, if we start to identify very specific community events that you're doing versus what you're not doing, and that translates to a need for additional space for something like that, then we would make that connection.
I guess I'm just thinking events cost money, but maybe are they thinking that they want the events to be self-funding, basically like charge admission and stuff? Is that kind of?
Yeah, I think this is more about developing these questions are really about developing spaces for them.
Okay.
Not so much about, so if you think about that very specific question, Dan, it's develop a new area for community-wide events.
I see.
So,
right.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily a direct correlation to, that they don't, or they're debunking that they want more community events. They just want you to use the spaces that you already have.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or at least 3 out of every 4 people do. All right, so this is kind of the order of kind of how people the actions that are most supported for funding in order of combining both existing and expand. So the number 1 was purchase land to preserve open space. The next 2 are taking care of your existing trail system and then developing new trails. The 4th one was taking care of your system as a whole. The 5th one, again, ties back to trails, which is, more about building loop trails within existing parks. And then the last 2 are really about facility driven, indoor recreation community center space, and then improving, expanding, and replacing the existing swimming pools. That could be, something that's combined into one pool. It could be something that you would look at and say, you know what, maybe we have greater value around swimming if we did something indoors and made it available to the community 12 months a year versus building something outdoors that's only available to the community 3+ months a year. All right, so that's the priority of the things that kind of showed up in green, based on how people want you to spend money. All right, so the next is just kind of summarizing all of this and what we would take all of those data points that we've heard and kind of identifying what are your high priority needs around recreation programs and services, things that are in the medium category, and things that are on the low end. So in essence, the things that are on the high end, either kind of spelled out as being, needed, or, have an unmet need, or tie back to some of the other conversations we've had with the community through the virtual community meeting. It's not completely based on just the survey results. And I think that's an important distinction between what it is that I just showed you. So again, the things on the lower end of the spectrum, and this is the big takeaway, it is not that if you're doing those programs or you're doing those in partnership with folks, they basically think you've got those programs right-sized. In other words, you don't need to do more of it. If you're not doing those programs, people are not wanting you to do them. So for example, if you're not doing gymnastics, which I don't believe you are, they don't want you to jump into the gymnastics business. So leave kind of well enough alone. The things that are in the medium category are those things that are really about, being very strategic about it. So though it is, a lot of Colton is very much tied to indoor kind of meeting space, gathering space, it kind of falls into the medium category. So if you were to do this survey again in say 5 to 10 years, I'm going to guess that reservation of indoor meeting space moves to the low priority simply because a lot of that need is being met now. So it's more about strategic investment in programs and services, as opposed to the things that are at the top, that those are things that people want you to figure out how to do more of, because they have not just a need for it and an unmet need, but they're also participating it potentially in other communities as well. And then when we look at parks, trails, amenities, same exercise, you can kind of see where some of those things rose to the top in terms of high priority. None of that's really a surprise. I think the aquatic facility competition lap pool is kind of teetering between high and medium. It would probably be, it's low high or high medium, however you want to kind of look at that. But certainly if you were to invest in aquatics and you only had limited dollars to do so, people are definitely desiring more of a recreation pool, activity pool, as opposed to a competition and lap pool. Same exercise on the low end of the spectrum. If you're doing it, you've got it right sized. You don't need any more of it. If you're not doing it, they don't want you to get into the business of doing it. And then, of course, the things that are on the medium side of the equation, it's very strategic. Disc golf, I think, is, more or less one of those things that maybe it's about improving what you have versus trying to add to it. So this is kind of where you're at in terms of your overall prioritized needs. The focus is simply, the exercise here is simply to recognize that you can't be everything to everybody. You don't come upon a pot of gold every year. You have limited resources. And given the fact that your community kind of is what it is, and I mean that in a very respectful way, you're not adding tens of thousands of people to your community. Your demographics aren't looking to change all that much over the next 10 to 15 years. So you can expect that the 4,000 people that are going to call Superior home in 15 years that they're not calling it now are likely going to align with these kind of prioritized needs.
Hey, Mike, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So with regard to downtown Superior, a lot of housing developments going in, what percentage of Superior in the next few years when those things get built out? Is it going to actually grow?
I think that kind of is captured within the demographic information that is shown. So, you know, from if I go all the way back to your population, get to it here. You're going to grow and over the next couple of years, it's going to add about 2,000 people, maybe about 3,000 people in 10 years and about 4,000 people in 15 years. One of the things I think is really important to recognize about the population information is simply that we are as far away from the most accurate information as we possibly can be, because we're in a census year. So these numbers might change, come next first quarter of next year, simply because we have the most recent census data. And the growth in turn will take into account some of the, maybe more dial in, not necessarily just take into account, but more dial in the projected growth associated with the new downtown. But I don't necessarily see the numbers going from 13,500 to say 30,000 in the next 15 years. When we start,
I understand that, but I guess my concern in the population is that let's say we add 2,000 or 3,000 people over the next handful of years, because we know there's a lot of houses being built and we know people are going to fill them up. That's a pretty good sized percentage of the Superior population. And so my, I guess, curiosity is all of those things that you had on the right-hand side of that last chart, if you can go back there, that were kind of in the low priority because we have them well covered. How many of those things become hot button issues because all of a sudden we have a lot more people filling the system?
Yeah, so one of the things, and that's based on, and that's a really good point, and that's kind of going to be my next steps. You guys are right there with me, but one of the things that we do have to plan for, even though things are kind of on the lower end of the spectrum, we still have to account for potential growth, right? And so if that means that we start to look at what we kind of call what your current inventory is, and understand what that level of service is, in order, even if your level of service is right sized today, 15 years from now, it may not necessarily be, because you might be at that point where you're teetering with regards to your current service level. So when you add the growth to it, what ends up happening is it means that maybe, for example, you have to build 2 more pickleball courts, or that you have to add a baseball field, or that you have to add another multi-purpose field. So growth in and of itself can potentially be a tipping point to say that, you know what, you need to add more of something in the low priority. But based on currently right now, you're not going to run out based on today's population and start adding more athletic fields or adding more pickleball courts or so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm just wondering how you're building that into this, because this is a snapshot of today. So when you fast forward 5 and 10 years and you look at adding 2,000 or 4,000 people, which would be 25% of our population or more. I just wonder how you're building that into the mix, because we have to, sort of start looking towards those things today, or we're not going to have any runway.
Right, exactly. And so again, when we went through the kind of overall process, we talked a little bit about what we call level of service, and understanding not just in terms of what you need in terms of park acreage, but what you need in terms of amenities within those parks. And there are a number of variables that go into establishing level of service. Some of what I've shared with you tonight, demographic information, and to your point, Todd, growth. We have to take that into account. Where does the system need to be, not just today, but where does it need to be in 15 years? Other things such as financial sustainability. Can you afford to build and manage and maintain them, whatever you build at a high level? Such things as trends. And I'll give you an example. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly, pickleball was not even a choice on a survey. So we have to understand some of the emerging issues that are occurring that whether it be across the state or whether it be across the region, or potentially things that that have a tendency to kind of land in Colorado first or second or third. And so other things those are other things that we need to take into consideration. Another consideration that we're not prepared to share with you yet is just what the current condition through not just the community's lens, but through the landscape architecture firm's lens of your existing system. And how does that translate to potential growth and or community need? So one of the things that obviously has come up as part of our conversation is you have 2 outdoor pools, but they tend to lean to being very obsolete in 2020 in terms of what they offer to your community in terms of outdoor swimming. And if we don't necessarily address that issue somehow, some way through this plan, those pools that are obsolete today become dinosaurs in 10 to 15 years. So again, I don't know, we're not at a point of saying, do we need to combine pools and build just one? But if you do, and let's say you pick one of the locations, that frees up land at another location to do something else with. Or if you choose to say, you know what, we're going to do an indoor recreation center and we're going to have indoor swimming there and maybe some sort of outdoor swimming component associated with that, well, then that frees up land of where your 2 existing outdoor pools are now to potentially do something with those sites as well. So this is a very, what I would kind of call iterative process. And I don't want you to walk away from this meeting saying that these prioritized needs determine exactly where the strategic direction is going. It's one set of data. Your community has expressed their need. They've identified where they want you to put money, but we have other data points to consider before we start moving in the direction.
We lost you again,
Yep.
Mike.
How does your system reinvest in your existing system? How about now? Yes, no?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So you basically just need to, we have a lot of other data points to consider when we start thinking about developing very strategic recommendations for the system, whether it be reinvesting in what you already have, as well as expanding it. Okay. So this is
I have a quick question sort of related to what
Sure.
Todd just asked. In terms of, do you have any like reference data points, or if we can somehow project this growth by saying we need 1 disc golf course per 10,000 people, or, you know, like, so we know what we have kind of now, or either through Esri or some other kind of, you know, like I said, reference data point that gives you how the existing infrastructure is providing the existing level of service, and, you know, could it project out how we might, you know, start to overwhelm the level of service to the point where people are disappointed with what they're getting?
No, you're absolutely right, Haley. We have to establish your current level of service and compare that to exactly how well you're meeting your community's needs with that existing level of service. Another component of that isn't just the fact that you have something, it's what's the condition of it. Is it meeting needs? Anybody can go out there and say you have an outdoor swimming pool, but is that outdoor swimming pool really meeting the needs associated with what people want out of outdoor swimming in 2020 or 2025? And the answer is no. You're absolutely right. And so there, again, there's a lot of information that will kind of all pull itself together in the next couple of months when we finalize that park inventory and assessment. When we do the assessment of the existing programs and services that you're providing, when we do the assessment of your maintenance operation, all of this information, it builds on itself. And then really the next set of data when we come back to you is going to answer a lot of your questions, because you'll start to see both in terms of tables and charts, but also in terms of mapping, in terms of equity, to understand how well your current level of service is not just doing today, but what it needs to look like, what your system needs to look like 10, 15 years from now, based on the needs, based on demographics, based on the current, existing system, but also based on, what you can afford to build and what you can afford to manage and maintain. Because I've said this once and I'll say it continually, we are not in the business of giving you an aspirational plan that that looks great, but you can't do anything with. We need to be realistic and implementable with our recommendations. And so obviously a big component of that is understanding the financial strategies that are necessary to support any recommendation that we make.
Mike, I have a question, if I may. This is Hollis. I'm interested in what you make of the very strong appetite and interest that we see around open space conservation, given how landlocked Superior already is. And as you were mentioning in your opening comments, our open land availability is very low. So do you take that more as a reflection of sort of our residents' ethos around conservation and open space, or do you actually see, or do you interpret that as an action step that we need to be mindful of seizing those open space opportunities with when we have them, or even letting some land maybe reclaimed back to open space? How do you interpret sort of us being landlocked versus people really wanting to see that?
Yeah, I think Colorado in general, and in particular in your neck of the woods, we've done a lot of work in the region, and you definitely have an ethos to open space and conservation. You love your view sheds. The other thing that, and this is just me, but I will share a very quick story to kind of give you another side of the coin. I was a Parks and Recreation director in Charlottesville, Virginia. And at the time that I was in Charlottesville, Virginia, it was voted the #1 place to live in the country. Well, one of the things that, and this had absolutely nothing to do with parks, but it had to do with building roads. There were a lot of people that basically said, you know what, we don't want to build any more roads because we want to lock the gates behind us and not let anybody else come in. In other words, you don't want to have the community get that much more dense. You don't want infill development. And so there may be a little of that going on. I cannot speak to that. I have not been a part of any of the conversations around the development of your new downtown, or potentially the development of other land that could potentially serve as residential areas. But there is some of that when you have a community that is already at 3,700 people, and then you look at Broomfield and you look at Louisville, and they're less dense by about 1,000 to 1,200 people per square mile. People have a tendency to want that growth to slow down because they just don't want to live in a location that feels like there's people on top of people. Again, I'm not necessarily saying that is the case, but that has been my exact experience in a community that was very dense already, and people just didn't want anybody else to move in.
This is Sarah. I'm going to piggyback off of that. I do think that the people in this town want open space and want to conserve the limited open space that they have, because it just in the recent last 2 years, a lot of that open space, which wasn't designated open space, it, developers had purchased it to develop, has been cannibalized quite quickly. And I think that's kind of raised the awareness of individuals in the town, the citizens of the town, realizing like we do have to preserve the limited open space that we have.
Yeah, and another thing that and this is just some of the work that we've done across the country and my own personal professional experience in your side of the table is sometimes people move into homes and that what they have in their backyard is open space, or they have great view sheds to open space. And then the next thing you know, somebody builds, another residential area behind them, and you lose that. You lose maybe one of the key reasons as to why you bought that house or built that house in the first place. So I mentioned early on, there's potentially a lot of social dynamics or that are going on when it comes to growth and why people want open space. I can't necessarily speak to exactly why folks answered the question so vehemently or so strongly, but there are potentially a lot of that growth dynamics, only 4 square mile kind of thing going on. So these are the next steps. I think that you will, a lot of your questions around where do we go from here, or how do we take into account growth? How do we use the needs to move to that next step is really going to become very crystal clear for you when we get that next set of data through. It's really, I would say that these first probably 4 out of the 5, if not 5 out of the 5, are going to be a part of that next conversation that we have with you, but it will incorporate a lot of the data points that we shared with you tonight.
Could I make a comment for next steps and just the level of service for people with special needs? And all throughout the survey, the desire for more services and infrastructure for people with special needs was quite low. But I feel I need to advocate for that group of people and advocate for the inclusivity for those people first, because I think it's the right thing to do. And if you don't have a child with special needs, you're of course not going to necessarily want to invest that money in those types of amenities for them. But not only is it the right thing to do, but I think there may be an ADA compliance issue. Like if we're putting in new playground equipment, there may, and I'd have to look into it again, but there may be government regulations and that we have to provide some sort of accessibility for those types of amenities.
You're absolutely spot on. I think that again, it's why we don't necessarily just make recommendations based on survey results. There are mandates and regulations that you have to meet. Inventory and assessment certainly takes into account ADA non-compliance. But then also when we start talking about programs and services, inclusion is not just a catchphrase. It is something that you as the recreation side of the equation very much should value. And we need to include that as a recommendation as well, because it is a population that that very much in some cases is more reliant on public recreation than other populations, simply because of potential resources and or availability to access those services. So your point is well taken, and definitely points out the whole concept of recognizing that this is one data point, but that there will ultimately be recommendations that don't necessarily align with the needs of the community. because, as you said, the needs of the community as a whole don't necessarily mean that you have to just do everything that everybody wants as a high priority, or it's not necessarily something that you should just you don't want to just ignore.
Hey, Marcia, if I may, real quick, we've been hyper vigilant, I believe, on ADA and the special needs in a lot of areas. I can tell you specifically that there's been a couple of things that we've put forth and realized that trying to meet special needs or ADA in particular was going to take the cost to the point where we just couldn't afford anymore, and we ended up not doing those projects because of that. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that because we've put those considerations in place, that we ended up not being able to do some of the things we would like to have done, but that means we could use that money later on to support more things or other things that we could do for those considerations.
Thanks.
Yeah. One thing I would like to share with regards to inclusivity, one of the, I don't want to say it's a trend, but it definitely is a trend that folks have started to lean to when they start building or adding playgrounds to your system, is creating an all abilities playground. That is really a push in terms of trying to create awareness and inclusion as part of your system. Not every playground can be all abilities, but that is certainly something that we see and we often recommend going forward.
Hey, Mike, along those lines and the special needs things, a couple questions that I had. One of the things we struggle with mightily is, and I love the list and thank you for, helping us really identify what the needs of the town are, but we've always tried to balance between the different demographics of the towns, in particular, like age, right? Amenities that for teens. And if you look at a lot of those things, maybe teens, it's not something that they would, are going to actively participate in. It's going to be different crowds that are going to participate in that. Is there anything that you guys do or any considerations you guys put forth on some of those things to help us be a little bit more aware of, oh, these things are for these demographics or the people with these needs, or these things could help out people at a younger or teenage or with special needs, areas that, that even though it may not be ranked as high, you might want to consider this a little bit higher because, it could help out in an area that is also missed. And that's one question. And I'll ask the second question before I let you respond. The second question that we also struggle with, and I don't know if you guys were going to get to this in phase 2, is, we have this area called the recreation corridor, or what we've always called it, the recreation corridor, that goes from, over by the dog park all the way through town 15 and up to the trailhead. And that's one thing we try to preserve as a recreation corridor. And did you guys get any kind of sense from the community or any takeaways, or is that phase 2 to really, reinforce the fact that we should really be considering that as a recreation corridor and keep that up? Or did that not even make a list? Just wondering your thoughts on that.
No, I think to answer let me answer your second question first. Part of some of the next steps is that connectivity analysis. And I think the recreation corridor component will certainly come into play as we get into not just landing the plane on the park facility amenity inventory assessments. It'll come into play when we start talking about level of service. It'll come into play in terms of how do you create that kind of synergy between the community's desire and need, for example, for open space and trails, which typically is what you see a recreation corridor, provide. And so I think there's a lot of factors that will certainly go into influencing, the preservation, quote unquote, of that recreation corridor. When we start talking about very age specific components, I think one of the things that the survey does exceptionally well is a lot of the things that are either very age and or skill-based perspective are the things that are on the lower end of the spectrum. It doesn't mean that you don't do it. It just simply means that maybe only typically 3 to 5% of your total population is playing soccer. Or whereas 50 to 60 or 70% of your population is actually out using your trail system. So again, it's about having a balanced, diverse parks, recreation, open space trail system, not just in terms of the amenities that you have in the system, but also in terms of the programs and services that you make available. So, you know, other things that kind of rose at the top there or towards the medium top were such things as adult learning classes. Well, we know that those have a tendency to skew to folks that are empty nesters and or seniors, because if you got little kids at home, the only thing that you're going out to learn is how to be a better parent, or you're going back to school. You just don't have time to participate in a whole lot of adult learning classes. So those are just some examples of how we start to understand on a program and service side who your primary market is for core programs or individual programs and service, and also who kind of your secondary market is. And community special events, for example, is, for lack of a better phrase, cradle to grave. Your entire community is a primary market, whereas athletics or camps or after school stuff is primarily geared towards, you know, 6 to 12-year-olds as a primary market and teenagers as a secondary market. So we're going to look to kind of create that set of balance for you, and that will be a part of that program assessment results as well.
Hey, Mike, this is Sarah. Did in the data collection, did you guys also look at like the existing programs that we provide and like how quickly they get snapped up? Like tennis, they had to add additional classes.
Right. That's exactly what we're doing right now. And it's so funny that you just brought up tennis, because we had a check-in just yesterday with staff about the program assessment work that we're doing. And one of the things that the things that we're looking at as part of that is where your programs are in their life cycle. So what I mean by that is you always introduce or sometimes introduce a new program, and if it goes well, it goes gangbusters, right? You get a lot of participation, or you get no participation and you immediately take it out. So we know that we have finite resources for programs and services. So we want to maximize the utilization of those resources so that we're not continually offering programs and services that people aren't participating in just because we're trying to give it CPR and or first aid. The connection, though, to your point, is exactly the connection why we don't just, another reason why we don't just rely on the community needs is one of the things that you can't do more of in terms of offering more tennis programs or more sessions available for them is because you don't have enough tennis courts to do so.
Exactly.
And so that's the whole kind of iterative back and forth with regards to a lot of data points that will help to shape what that level of service is. So it's why I'm so happy that Leslie included as part of the scope for us to do that operational analysis, because we would miss that if we weren't having those conversations on a parallel path with regards to the community input and the park and facility assessment and inventory and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different stuff that's kind of got to come together for us to really understand and refine your level of service so that they're unique to your community.
Okay, that I just wanted to make sure that that was getting captured, like
Yep.
tennis and aquatics, because I know aquatics was ranked really heavily, but also if you look at the data input, there's a lot of usage in aquatics as well.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, can you kind of walk us through next steps here timeline wise, and just a little, it's getting kind of late here, so as quick as you can.
Yeah, sorry.
Walk us forward here a little bit.
So timeline wise, we're kind of at the end of October. I would love to say that we would be back in front of you at your December meeting to speak level of service. But Leslie and I need to have kind of an offline conversation to say, is that going to be December or January? And at the very latest, we're going to come back to you with what I would call that really technical phase of park facility inventory assessment, the operation side of the equation, level of service, and the mapping at the next time we're in front of you. And then once we kind of land the plane on that, then we're kind of on that downhill slope of, the concept plans, the connectivity analysis, capital improvement plans, funding strategies, and so on and so forth. So there's going to be kind of two other really strong data-driven presentations. One is going to be December or January. Likely the next one will be February or March. And then at that point, then it's you'll pretty much have seen everything behind the curtain that will end up in the master plan. And then it's just a matter of master plan, your recommendation to town council for adoption. So that's kind of where we're at. We're hoping to be done by April, but I think that whether we do December or January is going to be that tipping point as to whether we're done in April or potentially in May.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
And Mike,
sorry, go ahead.
we were gonna identify a couple members, I think, from PROSTAC.
Right. I was just going to ask, Mike,
that.
what specifically do you need from us? Leslie had forwarded to me that we needed a couple of members that you guys could have access to offline whenever. What are you looking for in that?
I think it's primarily around that connectivity analysis. So you started this meeting with regards to trail rankings and prioritization. I think it's tying directly to your work that you have done related to trails and how that interfaces with Logan Simpson's connectivity analysis and the recommendations that come out of that.
Okay, so primarily looking at connectivity around town.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Anything else, Mike, that you need?
No,
share?
Great. I appreciate your attentiveness, especially since it's going on 9 o'clock there. Thank you.
Hey, I'm sorry, one
And for
final.
all the new members, I'm sorry if your heads are spinning, but and one of the things I do love to offer is just, Leslie has my email. And so you can either funnel questions directly through her, or if she's comfortable with you sending questions to me and copying her on it, I'm available to help, especially if it needs to be an offline conversation with some of the new members to kind of get you up to speed on kind of bringing you into, without necessarily understanding how the sausage is getting made, presentation that we made back in the summer.
Hey, Mike, one final question for you, or maybe a plea, if you would. We're starting to work our work plan for next year, I guess, in the next meeting or two that we have, November or December. So any early feedback that you could provide us to help plan our work plan for next year? It may not be the final thing that, that you guys are going to recommend, but anything that additional considerations that we should look into, including into our work plan, so that we can better prepare ourselves for next year, for the following year, to support some of these things, would be very beneficial to us.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, anything else for Mike? If not, thank you, Mike, and we are going to move forward here. You're welcome to join the rest of the meeting if you want, Mike, obviously, but drop off if you want as well.
Yeah, I'll catch up with you guys next time, but thank you so much. I appreciate your time and energy and passion.
Thanks.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Mike. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to try to rock and roll here a little bit so we aren't here at 1 o'clock, even though Neil likes long meetings like that. So as far as a couple of people that we can have to interface with these guys on connectivity, any hands that are going to raise here and just say, hey, I really want to do that? Corbett?
I can help with that too. Okay,
so Sarah, Marcia, and Corbett, I see 3. How about we have 3 people that they can have access to? And is everyone else good with that? Anyone else just say, I really got to be a part of that? Or are we good with those 3? Okay, you guys are it. Leslie, other than giving Mike their information to contact him and ask questions, or however that's going to happen, is there any other thing you need on that, or is that good?
No, that's good. And just for everybody's knowledge, I think there's going to be 2 OSAC members who are going to be part of that exercise. So it'll be the five of.
Okay. That sounds good. As far as I put on the agenda to talk through the schedule and to-dos for PROSTAC, I think you kind of heard what Mike had to say for that going forward. One of the things that we're going to be faced with here, I think, is having another meeting, and maybe it's just a meeting that we have in December for to hear the next presentation from him. I would hate to have us punt that until January and move that down the road. So just a heads up that sometime in December, we're going to try to do that. If it's at a regular time or another time, I don't know. December historically has been kind of a dinner and just a get together that way, but we may have to amend that a little bit this year. Looking next at 6B here, the combined PROSTAC OSAC trail rankings. I had sent a little while ago a email to all of you. You should have gotten a spreadsheet, and I can share my screen here. I think that's it. Can you guys all see that? Okay. Anyway, this is the same spreadsheet as what you should have for the trail rankings. This is the same thing that we talked about last month. We just did not have enough people to officially vote and be done with this thing. So this does not obviously include the input of new members. And at this point, I don't really want to go there. You'll get your chance next year, I guess, or in the future. But at this point, we talked through this a little bit last meeting. I don't think there were any surprises. There was a few things that were tiebreakers with OSAC and PROSTAC, but I think everything made logical sense. I didn't hear any dissenting opinions last time. You weren't with us, Corbett. Any particular input on that, or are you good with this?
I actually worked this with OSAC, so I'm very familiar with this and I'm good with it. Some of the yellows there I tried to highlight were the things that jumped one way or the other way for one of the groups more than just a few places. So I think it was very fair in the whole process, just so that people can understand what we did for the process was OSAC was wanting to have a member by member vote and combine all that. And I disagreed with that at the beginning. And I think they saw the light of my suggestion was that, look, we've already voted this as PROSTAC, so we already have one voice. They should do the same. And as far as ties goes, we can't really have the ties because if they have 3 of them at, if they have 5 trails at level at number 3, that gives the other, 4 or 5 an advantage over the same ranking. And so they understood that, they agreed, they undid their tie. In fact, we're willing to put them at the lowest number, but we worked it out. So I think this is very fair. I don't think it's any surprises, and I'm happy the way it turned out.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments on this? Do we have anyone that wants to motion for this to be finalized?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we accept this as our combined recommendation for the trail ranking.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, I would say all in favor, but let's say all not in favor. Can you speak up so that we can make this easy? Is there anyone that does not want to have this be the ranking for the year?
No, just real quick, can you explain why there's the green table on the bottom?
So these are county trails that were pulled out.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were really not, they're things that we can't really affect.
Okay.
And so we took them out of the ranking. The ones, there's a few county ones here, but they're things that we can still affect. These down here, we really can't.
So they're on the top, but they're on the top still. We're just not, okay.
On the
Then
top,
where's the, they're, well, I guess I can't.
They're in the ranking. They just, we're on, we put it separate so that people are understanding there's not much we can do, but they still were combined into the ranking.
Okay.
We still value them. Just understanding that we have less less effect on the ability to make any change in it because it's county.
Okay.
Any other comments or thoughts?
But Haley, we work with Boulder County. So Boulder County needs to understand that this is a high ranking for us. So that's also why, you know, it's, even though we don't have a lot of say in it, we put it so Boulder County is very aware that this is a high ranking for us.
Right. So
It's a lot of information to digest. I feel for you guys because I remember I've only been on this committee a year and a half, and I remember I remember ranking this trail the very first year, and I was very kind of.
Well, it's just, I find it amusing because someone I know from Louisville actually like said to me like that if I did anything on this committee, I should do number one. So I was like,
How many
So,
years is, I think
yeah,
this has been on the
so
top of the
these
list
will
for
go
like
as
4 or 5
recommendations
years.
to the county. Sorry, Neil, go ahead.
I was only going to say, I think that one's been on the top of the list for like 5 years now. So, you know, it's been a while.
Mhm. So these will go, the county ones will go as a recommendation to the county from us, though we know kind of from past years, the feedback that we've gotten and what's going to get done and what's not. So in any case, the yellow ones are the ones that from a town perspective, as far as the town funding them, the things that we care most about.
This is an aside, and maybe you can get to it later as an update for the new members. But what is the relationship, and like where is the committee on letting the county know that these are such a high? Like, what does that relationship look like with the county for letting them know this information?
We have we submit to the county. They have a request that we submit to as what trails that we feel or what they put out there. What do we want to see in terms of trails? And we submit this list to them. And I think it's like once a year we do that. I want to say it's around May when we submit our input to them. And it's not just for trails. We do the same thing for open space. So we'll have, we'll tell them we recommend this open space, which is actually their open space, but it kind of connects up to our open space. So they have opportunities for us to do it. So that's why we go ahead and rank these things. So we're ready to provide our input, and we provide our input every year just to make sure they know that we do consider this valuable.
Maybe
And so,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine, Jennifer, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, maybe as Neil said, it's been on the list for like 5 years. So my first thought is just why? Or
well, we've gone around and around on this and decided, do we want to rank the county trails with the other trails, and decided that we will rank them in there, but then we'll pull them out for our own trail ranking. And some of these things we know the appetite for the county, because we've submitted them a bunch of times, and they'll say, go pound sand, we're not going to do that. And so I don't want to say it's a moot point, because things change. There's more money available for different things, but largely these things have been there for a while, and they have not moved. And so just, I guess, be aware of that. The question in terms of the relationship, I'm not sure, maybe you can speak more to that, Leslie, as far as what the relationship is like, and if we, how much influence we really have in that. But from my perspective, what I've seen thus far is that I think they're willing to listen to, our logical arguments and things for things. However, I think they have their own decision matrix, and it doesn't necessarily align with ours.
And if I jump in real quick, I think the value added is, even though we've been on here for 5 years, I'll give you the example, which is not Boulder County, but it's a very similar example. You look at the open space that Superior just purchased. That open space had been on our list for 15 years maybe to purchase. And it was, it changed hands from level 3 then to CenturyLink and so forth. And we kept it on the list, kept telling the city, us and OSAC, this is high value, it's high value. I know they don't want us to want anything to do with us, but as the situation changed, look what happened, and they got the availability to purchase that land. So that's why it's very important for us to, in some regards, to keep this as a high priority, because we value this and the town values this. Number one, like everybody says, that's a huge safety thing that we all value, that we think is we're very instilled, passionate about, to make sure that we keep that area safe. And we want to make sure that Boulder County knows that this is, even though it's you know, it's their area that we still value one of our highest things to do.
Thank you.
Quick map reading question on the map tab of the Excel spreadsheet. What's the difference between a yellow trail and a green trail and the one blue?
So this is just an indicator right now of where things are. The green is the county stuff. The yellow is ours. There's existing things in here that the blue or purple there. I'm not entirely sure why that's there. It's tract H through there. But really the yellow is the things that the town has control over, and the green is the county. The blue is pretend it's yellow.
Thank you.
The blue is already there, right? And so, you know, if you look at the blue already there, how does the yellow interact with the blue that's already there? Because the blue is not an official trail, right?
I mean, it's not a trail, but it exists there, yeah.
Right. The blue is a wildlife corridor.
So it ties into the trails. Circling back to accepting this and adopting this as our resolution for the year, I'd like to just call a vote here. We can go down the list of folks, or we can just say whoever is in favor and whoever is not. So I'm going to just ask whoever is not in favor. Do we have any nays on this? And with the raise of hands, can we see who has who agrees with us for resolution? Okay, we have a unanimous passing of this. I am going to move on now to Colton Road. And so I took some pictures when we were there today, and I was uploading them to the computer, and I was looking at them and realized, you know, this is really not very useful information. So I'm going to skip my photography lesson there today. But we did have a tour of the facility. Someone else that was there want to just kind of give us an update. I don't know, Sarah, do you want to just go through what we did, what we saw today?
Yeah, Leslie walked us through it. I'm personally super excited about the space. Walking through it for me, it helped me figure out what the spaces are actually going to be, and as opposed to concept on paper. Yeah. You know, I think we had like a lot of questions when we were there on site, and Leslie was able to answer them. But yeah, I'm super excited about the space. And in relations to what Mike presented about recreation/community center, when he was presenting all of that, I was wondering like how much of that is going to come off the survey once we have a community center. And I know library has kind of come up, and I kind of feel like once we have that community space up and running, and, you know, we have programs for like, you know, the toddler reads and the mommy and me library time and stuff. I wonder if that's going to kind of like the library need is going to kind of come off of that, because the community center is going to kind of provide that community center that libraries provide. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thanks,
Jennifer
Sarah.
was there and Haley was there too. They want to.
Anything to add, guys?
I think in general, it looks like it's going to be a very functional place to go. I mean, in terms of, I think it's got a lot of options or opportunities for doing different things with the spaces. So I think it's going to be a really good addition to recreational activities. And I do kind of agree with Sarah in the sense that I mean, it's unfortunate, but it would be nice. I'm sure that some of that's going to come off of the needs section of, you know, community needs, because we'll have met it with some of the space that's there.
Some of the ideas of what it could look like and how it could be used came up while we were there, especially for me with like new eyes seeing the property. So what I wasn't clear about was, is that totally a PROSTAC role of like how that's going to look, or who's heading that up? Like, what does that look like?
Leslie, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I really think it's going to be a partnership. We do have staff kind of queuing up to oversee the operations there and to help put policy and procedure and all those kind of things in place to make sure we can open and close the building. And then to work with you all on, specifically looking at the results of that master plan and the survey, and looking at what our community wants and needs and where the gaps may be, and can this facility fulfill some of those needs and some of those gaps. So we're going to be probably looking for vendors to provide programs and services there, of all different types. And we are not going to probably get the recipe 100% right the first time. So we're willing to try some new and different things, but to try and hit some of those really top needs that are out there. Obviously, meeting space was a huge need that was vocalized when we were doing a lot of the community outreach just at the very beginning of the conceptual stage of the building. So I think that that's some low-hanging fruit we can try and accomplish, as well as the library services. And those are pretty well queued up to be available for the public. So, working with you all to noodle through some of the finer details of, should we use this space for the teens during this time, and for, maybe we need to do some fitness or wellness classes, during some other times, and trying to drill down to that level. But I think it'll very much be a partnership, and Karen Snortland, who's been overseeing the committee work for the 2 years she's been with the town, is going to transition into the role of kind of overseeing that facility and the operations there. So she's going to be all ears and probably become much more involved in the PROSTAC committee specifically, so she can have more direct communication with you.
That's good news.
So I think that my takeaway from going there today was just, wow, it's different than it was. It used to have a bunch of walls in it, and it was this compartmentalized place that I wasn't sure how it was going to be very useful. But I think they've done a good job of clearing all that out, and it looks like it actually has potential to look like the plans as they're drawn up. So that's good, and they're making good progress there. As far as just to kind of piggyback, I guess, on what Leslie was saying in roles and moving forward, one of the things that I would really like to see PROSTAC help as much as we can is put effort in to make this place successful. The town has put a huge amount of money and effort into it, and it can meet a lot of people's needs. And so we as a group and the town staff and whoever else we can drag into this endeavor, I think we can either make this wonderful, or we can probably have it be a flop if we don't do a good job. And so let's just collectively, hopefully we can work real hard and make it be wonderful. Going forward in the next few months, we'll be kind of, I guess, putting that into shoe leather in some ways, and figuring out what those decisions are and what they need to be, thinking through programming and all of those things, along with Leslie and Karen's crew. And so I guess just put it in the back of your heads as things that we will be intimately involved with in the next year, and start thinking about those things. Don't be bashful. And if there's anybody on this group that's particularly passionate about that and really wants to dive in great detail, we'll be looking for a few people to really do that. So thank you for the hand, Jennifer. Noted. I'm not sure anything else we need to say on that exactly, other than stay tuned. As we engage in that further, there will be more. Neil, you just look like you have something you want to say. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No. I was just getting ready to unmute for my section, so nothing to add,
Okay.
but it's a good lead in to where we're headed. So.
Okay, Doc. So why don't we move past that and look at the PROSTAC OSAC move forward plan, and Neil will give us all the details.
Yeah, so just a brief history lesson, since we already and Mike is great. He just, I think we've been through a couple of meetings with him so far. He tends to talk a lot, so we might have to corral him in the future. But just some history, so obviously the town just purchased the CenturyLink piece of land, 182 acres, which was the top of the list for for every list that we had in terms of open space purchases. That came out of the open space fund. We sort of borrowed ahead for about 18 years to pay for it. So as part of that, the open space committee was somewhat formed to help to administer the funds. The town residents passed a tax quite some time ago to help fund open space purchases. And OSAC's role had historically been about taking those funds and applying them to open space. So with that purchase sort of getting signed, I guess back in the spring, the board asked a question about the potential merger of PROSTAC and OSAC. I think there's different opinions within the board itself as to whether or not a merger made sense. And some of that was also driven by some historic conflicts between the two committees in terms of who had responsibility for certain aspects of trails. So both myself and then Sandy Hammerly, who was a rep to OSAC, took it back to the committees, and both committees sort of talked about it separately, but some of the consensus was quite the same. How do you do this? You had at the time probably not quite 18 people, but you probably had 15 people. There's a lot of different work streams. Are you doing a subcommittee which is reporting out to the main committee? Is question around these are volunteers. How many hours a month are we talking about in terms of meeting? There's also just a fundamental differences with what PROSTAC had been focused on versus what OSAC had been focused on, and how do you sort of merge those two relatively independent work streams? So instead, what we said is, well, why merge, and why not reassess what they're doing and maybe think about what are some things that they could do better or differently, or what can we do about drawing a better dividing line between them? So while the CenturyLink purchase was huge for OSAC, the purchase of the Land Rover building, which we now call 1500 Colton, is huge in my head for where PROSTAC is going to go. Recreation and meeting and community facilities has been the top of the list for every survey done by PROSTAC or the community for a decade. We've come close to recreation centers, and then we've just sort of said no, because as Mike alluded to, you can have a 50,000 square foot facility, which is tens of millions of dollars, and you're talking $1 to 2 to 3 million a year just to run it. Which I think when we looked at potentially buying the Lifetime Fitness space or expanding the sports stable, in both cases we sort of said no. But what kept getting forgotten was the community space is independent of recreation space. So 1500 Colton gives us that community space, but we as a community have never really talked about programming indoor space. It's just not been something that we've ever had to do. We've had the pools, we've had outdoor programming, we've had sort of ad hoc programs here and there, but an indoor space is just not something that we've ever had to contemplate. And as you look across other municipalities, that have rec centers or libraries or other community spaces, the citizen communities committees do a lot to help assist staff with programming it. So, as part of this realignment, I think we as a board and as a community sort of acknowledge that the two committees are kind of shifting where their focus is going to be. So there's actually more than enough work for 18 people. So why try to merge them when there's probably too much work for one committee? So I don't know if I can share or not, but I'm going to imagine that I can. I guess I can't. Maybe I can. Here we go. And if I switch here, can anyone see that? Okay, great. This was sort of what we showed. So the board just had its work session on Monday. It's been all of 2 days and I've already forgotten. And this is sort of the envisioned dividing line between the two committees. The main thing here and where the overlap had historically always been was with trails. And then, the question is ultimately, if it's a trail in a park versus a trail in open space, who has jurisdiction, so to speak. And it didn't help anything that the name PROSTAC includes an O and an S, which then just sort of created more of that angst and confusion. And staff, quite honestly, was placed in the unenviable position of trying to play peacemaker between the two groups and bring something to the board that that worked for both committees. And if you all remember, at least some of you remember, just I think about 6 months ago, as we looked at the US 36 bikeway extension, and ultimately it was going to go through it will go through Autry Park. Both PROSTAC and OSAC looked at it and came out with completely different ideas on how that alignment could work. And I think that's actually not surprising. Both committees, PROSTAC and OSAC, have a different sort of reference point for how trails can be used or how they can be utilized through different spaces. But what that does is actually put staff in a position of, well, now how do they choose? Or do they kick it over to the board to sort it out? So part of this, next step is, if this alignment was palatable to the board, which on Monday it directionally was, is it palatable to PROSTAC and OSAC? And if this committee, which I acknowledge, I think it's 4 out of 5 new members or 5 out of 4, it's an evolving committee, and OSAC's in a bit of the same space as well. So if anything, this is actually the right time to think seriously about realigning the committees, given the scope of what's changing. But then also, as we think about how the town is going to evolve, I think we've talked already today about how we're growing. And it's not unusual that you have a lot of sort of committees that sort of change over time. I think it's fascinating that in Louisville, there is a recreation center committee only. Like their job is to oversee the Louisville Recreation Center. And there's a library committee. Louisville has a problem with too many committees. I think we, as the current PROSTAC, by sort of recalibrating what it is that PROSTAC has done and what PROSTAC is going to do going forward, there's a tremendous amount of work. And I think, as Leslie already alluded to, with 1500 Colton, as you sort of start trying to shoebox in like the different aspects of that building and how we're going to collaborate with CAPS, we'll collaborate with the Historical Commission and other things like that. It's going to, there's going to be so much direction that needs to be provided, because we're also going to work with the community in terms of what do they want to see. So I think, rather than trying to mush two committees together where it looked like there's just way too much work, that we thought that, PROSTAC, with a little less focus on trails and the open spaces, might be beneficial. And then in the meeting on Monday, Trustee Lish, who used to be the chair of OSAC, one of his points was, in order to even make this better, rather than do that trail ranking every single year, maybe make it every third year, because quite honestly, it hasn't changed that much in a very long time. And as we talked about, the things on the top of that list have been on the top of that list for a very long time. And Boulder has its own priorities, which, I mean, I think we can all acknowledge that, I think the CenturyLink purchase, it was the top of our list for a long time, and things finally aligned. For Boulder, things may finally align, but there's not a lot of need to have OSAC and PROSTAC coordinate on a list that doesn't materially change year to year. So if that becomes a less frequent sort of rank and rating, it does start to be, create more opportunity to get really engaged on the things that PROSTAC members could find interesting. And, as part of this, there's no problem if people want to switch between the committees. I think if we change the charter, if we change what it is that they're going to do, I think it should be acceptable that we may have people that want to move from the left hand to the right hand. And I think we'll figure out a way to make that work. But as you look at OSAC, one of the things that's emerged for OSAC is, there used to be a member, his name is Peter Ruprecht, and he did a tremendous amount of work on bird watching and bird life within Superior. And they're trying to figure out how do they bring that out to the community. If you think about the bobcat that's been seen in Original Town, that's fascinating. Like, number one, I didn't even know they live this, in this part of the town at all. But how do you share aspects of that with the community? We've seen all sorts of crazy wildlife between the elk and the coyotes, and how do we encourage that with the wildlife corridors and ensure that we've got safe passage through construction zones and stuff like that? And that's something that OSAC sees as a new opportunity for the OSAC group to kind of get more engaged with going forward. And then obviously on the left, as we've talked about 1500 Colton, also, tech recommendations. We talked at the last meeting about, registering or reserving tennis courts. How do we do that? How do we make that more amenable to people? This is the first year we've had to do pool reservations, and how can we leverage that platform for the tennis court? So my thought was, and I think across the board, across the town board, we all acknowledge, if there's at least 18 people that want to help us, why don't we find a way that the 18 members of these two committees can continue to provide that input and help the town thrive as we continue to grow and add more amenities. So anyways, it was a long wind up to what is a simple slide. Happy to take any questions or get your feedback.
Hey, Neil, one question, two parts really. So just so it's clear in my head, then would like Coyote Ridge fall over to OSAC, but interconnectivity within Superior from the outer edges to the new town center, that would be a PROSTAC thing?
Yeah, and I think what's still great here is there's going to have to be ongoing coordination, but I think you're right. Within the quote unquote Coyote Ridge, because the board's going to talk about names on Monday. OSAC would take the lead on some of those trails, but as we think about how do we connect different parts of town, PROSTAC would be taking the lead there. And if you have any name recommendations, I think OSAC's made some recommendations for Monday, but don't hesitate to email the board that you think they're great or bad, or you have alternatives. Todd, I think you're on mute.
Any other questions on that, guys?
I was just going to ask quickly, Neil, if you discuss at all renaming then PROSTAC to take the OS, the open space, out of it, such that it's more reflective of a potentially updated charter, and that for future volunteer recruitment, it alleviates any confusion that folks might have about, the different intentions of both groups.
Absolutely. And I think, if anyone has an acronym recommendation or just a straight out new name recommendation, I think now is the time to make it. I think the next steps here are, make sure that both committees are directionally comfortable with this. Staff can work with the board on sort of revisiting the charters. And then, as part of that, also renaming the committees to reflect this sort of, break with the past, if you will. But also, I think you're absolutely right, on a go forward basis to ensure that the folks that want to join understand what's under the umbrella. So, any name ideas I think would be well received.
I vote for Cat Purr.
I think the other sticking point too in the past has always been the fact that we have the T for trails and they don't. In fact, we both deal with trails quite a lot in different ways.
Right.
So
No,
either
I think
we should both have it or we should both drop it.
Maybe it's a little T for both, but you're absolutely right. It's a good point.
So I am going to be meeting with Ryan, who's the chair of OSAC, in the next little while here, and kind of talking through the details of what this might look like. Then with town staff trying to, kind of zero in on things that aren't maybe obvious in Neil's little bulletin board chart there, and how we can make sure that we cover those things. The goal here being that there's no overlap between the two committees. So they're not trying to have joint lists between committees. We're not trying to, reinvent things. And it's all very clear. There's certainly going to be some pieces of the puzzle where we do meet up. So for example, trails that come out of parks might go into open space, and there's going to be these places where we do bump up against each other. And so I would hope anyway that we can figure out how to work well in those realms. I don't see any problems with that, but at least hopefully we can get to the point where there's not any overlap, and bring some clarity to that so we can move forward. And the other thing that I think that we going forward in PROSTAC are going to see is that with 1500 Colton and some other things, more of that potentially in the future in the new downtown area with even more community space and things in the future, there's going to be a lot more for us to focus on that way. And just from a time standpoint, it would be best for us to not try to be focusing on everything, so that we can do a better job of that. So I will relay to you guys maybe a more detailed version of that that slide that Neil just put up there, and get some input from you guys. We certainly want this to be something that everyone can buy into, both logically and sort of just philosophically. This makes sense, so that we can tackle it. And by all means, I guess I would also encourage anyone here that sees any problems with kind of fundamentally what Neil put up, speak up, because I don't think Neil or I or Ryan or anyone else pretends to know everything. And so if there's things that you see that would be better ways of doing this, by all means, please raise your hand and say something. You don't have to now necessarily, unless you want to, but certainly feel free to email me or give me a call in the next little while here. And as far as names, like Neil said, please, I don't know about your name, Dan, if you're going to be allowed to name it or not, but we'll see.
Yeah, Todd
any
Todd
other
mentioned,
thoughts or questions?
I wanted to just add on to what Todd had said. I mean, one of the other things that I was not a big fan of was the sort of tops down, let's merge the two committees, which, anytime you try to drive something from the top, it usually fails, see mergers 101. But this is more bottoms up. Like, what did we hear from the committees? What did we hear from the committee members? And that was kind of what drove this. Hey, I think there's plenty of work for these two committees to coexist with some tweaking. So exactly what Todd said. If you have any more tweaks, please, shoot them through. And let's incorporate them now.
Any thoughts or questions on that before we move on?
I appreciate the analysis. I'm in favor of it and I agree with it.
Okay, if there's nothing else on that, moving on to some updates on a few things. Leslie, pickleball, where are we at?
We're getting so very close. So I do have a walkthrough with the contractor tomorrow and hope to get good news. And if they give us the go ahead, we are looking at the first weekend in November for what we're going to call our opening event. And since we can't really do a typical grand opening, what we're going to do is provide free pickleball clinic that family units can sign up for. So you can sign your family up for a 20-25 minute pickleball clinic on a court. We're going to have, I think, 3 instructors out there and rotate people through. So we'll do that probably on Saturday. And once we're done with that, the courts will be open and available for play.
Sounds good. Thank you. Since we have you on the hot seat here, Leslie, Crusher Fine Trail. We last meeting left it as though we wanted to spend our $5,000 to have some engineering firm go through that and essentially get it to the place where everything was designed and ready to go. And then we could get money for it when we wanted to. And your pretty quick response was, sorry guys, but it's way more expensive than that. Do you want to give us an update on that?
Sure. I actually was a little shocked at the price tag that came back for, the small project that it was. And I'm more than willing to look at another firm to give us a quote on that. I think that we're not looking at somebody forging a new trail specifically through an area where one doesn't exist, but to provide a complementary trail. And there may be some needs to merge it in certain places based on the topography and other things like sprinklers and stuff like that. But I don't think it's as big a project as they kind of outlined it to be. And I could be completely wrong.
On that one, I was wondering, Leslie, do we have any history about how much we spent to do the same level of engineering work for that existing path that we have that's crusher fine along McCaslin? And could we basically just say, why does this cost so much more than it costs for the other one? Have them explain that for us?
I have not been able to find that data, and I don't know how long that trail's been in place. And obviously, prices change over time, but we do have several landscape architectural firms that we work with, and I'm happy to pitch that out to another group and see if we can get a slightly better, price tag on it.
Hey, Leslie, this is Sarah. Was there what was so expensive? Was there a whole bunch of sprinkler heads that had to be moved or something?
It was simply the planning and engineering and the construction documents.
Yeah, so this isn't even getting the construction done. It was like going to be 12 grand just to figure out how much it was going to cost.
Seems like we could like community source this. I mean, I think we've got enough members of the community that are at home. If somebody could do the 100-foot sections of the engineering. I mean, I don't think the engineering of this should cost 30 or 40% of the project. It should be like a 5%. I mean, it's freaking dirt.
Yeah, I think it was a little out of line. So let me see if we can pitch that out to a couple of our other firms that we're currently working with and see where that gets us. And see if we can do, get something that's a little bit more reasonable.
Hopefully we can.
Yeah, I've been.
I think we're all on board with spending our whatever slush fund or whatever it is you call it that we have each year. But this money, if we can put it towards that, I think we'd like to get that done.
Yeah, I mean, there's a concrete trail there that's been there for as long as I can remember, and it seems like even if there were a couple of sections that weren't perfect, to Dan's point, if there's a tree in the way or something in the way and somebody has to hop on the concrete for 10 feet, it's not like the end of the world. Just laying gravel along the side of it. There's many places where I think that would be really easy.
I will put that on my to-do list.
Thank you, Leslie. And then the last thing for you, I think, Leslie, for tonight is Coyote Ridge grant update that got submitted, and what are the next things that are going to happen on that? I think we won't hear back for quite a while, will we?
They are evaluating those, and I have not gotten any feedback on how we are rating. Fingers crossed. They are requesting an in-person presentation as the next step. And I think that's slated for like the January, February time period. So once I get any information back, I'll be sure to let you know. With the approval of the conservation easement for that CenturyLink property, we will have to, it kind of sets the framework to work really collaboratively with both Jefferson County and Boulder County on that project. So I think they'll be willing to kind of join in as partners on that, and that'll in essence strengthen our proposal.
So we went with that proposal and not the trail maintenance proposal?
They would not fund both of them in the same year for the same site. We did also submit a grant application for what I call the connector trail in Autry Park, which was formalizing the Crusher Fine Trail with the thought process that when they put in the 36 bikeway trail, that's going to be hard surface, probably more heavily used, and anticipating higher rates of speed on that trail. So formalizing a Crusher Fine Trail kind of on the uphill side of Autry Park as an alternative route for people who, want a soft surface trail, but also more diversity in terrain and potentially less crowded and lower speeds. In addition, the trailhead amenities at the Ormond Roche trailhead were included with that. So it's a connector trail and a trailhead amenity grant ask. Those were combined together.
So those are the three big asks in the grant: Coyote Ridge, the connector at Autry or / Crusher Fine, and Ormond Roche amenities.
Yes, correct.
Awesome. Thanks, Leslie.
Sure.
So from a timeline perspective, you had mentioned like January, February for the next meet with them. This is a springtime decision, or do you know when we'll hear back?
They have indicated that the dollars would be available in the May to June time period. I don't have a specific timeline on when they're going to tell us, yes, you're going to get the money. I suspect it's after we make that in-person presentation.
Okay.
And I'm on pins and needles, so I think there was some good interest in the CenturyLink property because so many of our neighboring communities are also pretty excited about that.
Well, we'll hope to hear good news on that one. Let us know, obviously, if there's anything else needed. The last thing that I had for here was just to go through the Q4 work plan items. There's 3 items in the Q4 work plan. One is review the facility usage, recreational programming with the PROST staff. There's just feels like a whole bunch of that going on with regard to Colton going to be coming up. But outside of Colton is something that we're going to need to understand and see how we want to deal with that going forward. And then it's another one is assess the need for additional public engagement to help recommend new recreational programming offerings. That obviously is sort of been wholly subsumed into the master plan. And so that's not something we're going to specifically be doing ourselves. And then the last thing in Q4 was develop the 2021 work plan. And so I will start putting that together for our next meeting, which is the 18th of November. And I know we're getting close to holiday time here. And so what I'd like to try to do is on November 18th, have some straw man of our work plan, probably go through programming things with Leslie. And I'm not sure what else we'll be doing next month, but try to get most of those things done. I'm thinking out loud here a little bit, but I'm kind of envisioning maybe December being a maybe not a 2-hour meeting with Mike, but the next step with Mike, and maybe we could combine that either with a dinner out. I don't even know if that's going to be realistic this year with COVID things and all of that. So I guess stay tuned for what that's going to look like. But just a heads up that in December, I would definitely like us to have a meeting where we can at least not stand a month in the way of the master plan moving forward. So anything else to go through tonight?
I got a question for Neil. When is the, do we know when anything will be finalized between PROSTAC and OSTAC? If it's not yet, because I'm assuming that we will want that to help guide our work plan for 2021.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know, the board met after OSAC's meeting. So OSAC's not going to meet till, I guess, early November. And then obviously we have the election. So the board may not have a meeting at the end of November. The board might not get to this till the beginning of December. I'd like to believe that, if we can go faster, we would. I think the board's just running out of calendar time, but optimally before the end of the year. And unfortunately, the best way I can describe it is the plan is a plan until the plan is changed. So PROSTAC is still PROSTAC until the board's able to get consensus around changing it.
So if we do change, then after the fact, then I'm assuming we would have a time to update a work plan to reflect that.
Yeah, I think so. Or, as you go through the work plan, kind of highlight the things that would potentially come out or go in.
Yeah, I think what you just said, Neil, is probably the way to go, where we have things clearly delineated, whether they would be in or out, depending on the finalization of that. Anything else we should go through? Sarah?
Yeah, just my 2 cents before the November meeting. If we can meet at Grasso Park or another park, because again, like I feel like that's really helpful when we meet at an outdoor space and kind of walk through it and talk through it and then get on the Zoom.
I think that's a good thing. We missed that today because of the walkthrough of Colton, but let's say Grasso Park, 6 o'clock before our next meeting on the 18th.
Yeah. And I've been meeting with CAPS, but this meeting's gone way too long. So I'll talk about CAPS when we meet at Grasso Park.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. Meeting is adjourned.
Sorry, I have one final question. This is really
Sorry,
just
go ahead.
for Leslie. So I've been walking, it's my backyard. I've been walking Coyote Ridge a lot lately, and there's a lot of old barbed wire fences still in there. And is there any plans to do any kind of mitigation with those? There's the social trails, and they're clean of the social trails. And I went through and made sure that there was really no interference with those things. But not everybody stays in the social trails, and it's still, if you look at, some of the critters that we get visiting us, I'd hate for anything to get caught up in there, because a lot of it's just been cut open and just kind of pulled off to the side. So you have this barbed wire just kind of rolled up and off to the side. So is there any kind of mitigation plans for that in the future?
I wouldn't say there's any hard plans, but I agree. We need to work on getting that cleared out. We don't need to wait until the master plan, the trail master plan's done to get rid of barbed wire. It doesn't have any purpose up there currently. I'm happy to work with our park maintenance staff, and maybe we can get volunteers to flag some of that, and then they can go around and pick it up. And then, of course, next summer we'll have our youth corps group that can help do some of that property cleanup and some minor trail work, that absolutely needs to get done that first year.
Hey, Corbett, in your walking, do you want to put some pins on a map?
Yeah, I started doing that the other day, but I was going to say even one thing better. If I happen to walk with a pair of dikes in my pocket, would you be too upset if I helped clear it a little bit?
I'd
Go
also
right
leverage
ahead.
the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. That's a great community project for them.
I like
Okay.
that idea, and we can work with our make it a volunteer project and kind of formalize that, give them credit for that.
Do you want to review the email blast?
That is a good point, Dan, please. You always do a good job of our 3 sentences.
So here's what I've got. Participated in a walkthrough tour of the 1500 Colton building. Received an update on the PROST master plan process, including outcome from the survey and virtual community meeting. Voted to approve combined OSAC PROSTAC trail rankings, to discuss the go forward plan for OSAC and PROSTAC committee collaboration and purview.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you guys. Thank you, Dan, for your note taking, and goodbye all. Meeting officially adjourned this time.
Good night.